Hi y'all, welcome and welcome back to this video series on Kantian ethics. In this video, we'll talk about the goodwill, intent, and moral motivation. Kant's ethics centers on the conviction that morality does not depend on the outcomes of our actions, but on the principle from which we act. The moral worth of a person lies not in success, fortune, or even in virtue understood as character traits, but in the exercise of a good will. The will to act from duty, guided by reason, and respect for the moral law. Kant calls the good will the only thing that is good without qualification, meaning that it remains good under every circumstance. Intelligence, courage, and even kindness can become harmful when guided by corrupt motives, but the good will shines with moral worth regardless of the results. In the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, Kant insists that moral philosophy must identify what makes an action good in itself. The good will is not good because of what it accomplishes or because it produces happiness. It's good because it chooses to do what's right for the right reason. The value of the good will is intrinsic. It depends entirely on the motive of duty rather than on the external world, which is subject to luck, error, and change. Even if the goodwill fails to achieve its goal, it retains full moral worth because the intention behind it is in accordance with the moral law. Kant draws a strict distinction between acting from duty and acting merely in accordance with duty. To act from duty is to perform an action because it's morally required, because a person recognizes it as a command of moral law. It's doing the right thing because it's the right thing and for no other reason. So to act in accordance with duty is simply to do what duty demands, but for other reasons. Self-interest, social approval, emotional satisfaction. So, when we act from duty, those actions have moral worth. When we act in accordance with duty, those actions do not have moral worth. Here's an example. A shopkeeper who gives a fair price because it's good for business is acting in accordance with duty, but not from duty. If that same shopkeeper charges fair prices because honesty is morally right, then the action has true moral value. What distinguishes those two is not the act itself, but the motive or the intent that brings the act about. So, in the example where the person is acting from duty, they're giving a fair price because that's honestly a fair price and honesty is morally right. The presence of the goodwill is going to be guided by respect for the moral law. And that is what makes them do the right thing because it's the right thing. It's that respect for the moral law. It's not looking at outcomes and it's not looking at self-interest. So when you're looking at these things, I know this is really confusing. Kant can be difficult to get a hold of at first, but once you get him, you'll be able to remember him. So, what we want to do when we're thinking about the goodwill, I'm not really concerned about y'all distinguishing in the acting from duty and acting in accordance with duty. I can see how that can be difficult. But the main thing when you're talking about the goodwill is you're doing the right thing because it's the right thing and for no other reason. And this trips people up a lot. So, doing the right thing because it's the right thing and for no other reason, for no other intent, but just because it's the right thing to do. So getting more into this idea of motive, intention, and the moral law. Kant defines duty as the necessity of an action from respect for moral law. That statement unites reason and moral feeling. Reason identifies the moral law, and respect gives it motivational force. Moral intention must therefore be governed by reason and respect for the moral law, not by inclination or hoped-for consequences. Inclinations, like desires, sympathies, and emotions, They might align with moral behavior, but they lack unconditional reliability. They're contingent, and they can lead to partiality or self-interest or bias. The only stable ground for moral worth is a will determined by the moral law itself. To act morally is to let reason determine one's motive, to act out of reverence for the principle that could hold for all rational beings, so that it's not going to be partial. It's not going to be case specific. It's going to be something that applies to everyone the same all the time, no matter what. So now let's take a look at what Kant thought when it comes to consequences and moral worth. So for Kant, consequences belong to the realm of nature and chance, not morality. We can control our intentions. We can control our motives, but we can't control the effects that follow our intentions. Therefore, moral worth can't depend on what actually happens. The success or failure of an action adds nothing to or subtracts nothing from its ethical value. The goodwill is valuable in and of itself. That value doesn't change and it doesn't fluctuate based on the results or the consequences of what happens after we act from the goodwill. So that may seem like it's very severe, especially in cases where good intentions produce harm or where benevolent results come from selfish motives. But Kant's point is not that results are irrelevant to happiness, but that they're irrelevant to moral judgment. Only the principle on which you act determines whether the will is good. So you can do something and it can have terrible consequences, but if you did it with the right intentions, if you did it with the right motive, that makes it have moral worth. Whereas if you do something with a bad motive and a bad intent and you just happen to end up with good consequences, that act, no matter how good the consequences are, has zero moral worth when it comes to Kant. So in considering some examples here, a person who tells the truth even when it leads to personal loss acts from duty and displays moral worth. That motive of honesty, guided by respect for the moral law, matters more than the harm truth might cause. By contrast, a person who gives to charity for social praise is acting in accordance with duty, but they lack the goodwill, because that act is driven by inclination, not a duty. So when you're trying to get praise out of giving money or giving something to charity, you're not actually doing it for the right reason. So Kant's going to say, in that instance, there's no moral worth in that action. So if you keep a promise out of the moral obligation to keep that promise, that is going to show moral integrity. But if you keep a promise only out of fear for like damage to your reputation, that is not going to demonstrate moral integrity, according to Kant. So even when our moral intentions fail, when a well-intentioned effort ends badly, the moral agent's will retains its worth. The good will retains its worth. Kant insists that the purity of the will, not the outcome of the action, is the measure of morality. In conclusion, Kant's analysis of the good will redefines the foundation of ethics. Morality arises from autonomy, the capacity to act from reason and respect for moral law. The moral agent's task is not to achieve happiness or success, but to act rightly because it's right. In this, the good will expresses both human dignity and moral freedom, the power to choose the law of one's own reason over the pull of inclination. In the next lesson, we'll apply this principle to the categorical imperative, explaining how the moral law can be expressed as a single universal rule binding on every rational being. And here are our reflection questions. How does intent or motive affect whether an action is morally right? Can an action still be moral if the outcome is harmful? Why or why not? How does this approach challenge consequentialist thinking? All right, y'all, that's all for now. I'm sorry if this video seemed redundant, but it's just something that students seem to have a difficult time getting the hold of sometimes. or many times. And I want to make sure that y'all see that when you're doing the Kantian analysis, the first step is, what is my motive in doing this? It must be the goodwill. All right? So I hope that that point was made very clearly in this video. If y'all want to see some more videos about Kantian ethics or about philosophy or other topics in ethics, take a look at the videos posted on our channel. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.